In the heart of the backlands, where the sun punishes mercilessly and the reddish dust dances with the wind, he lived an old drover named Sebastião. His fame preceded him, a living legend forged in decades of dangerous trails, driving cattle that looked like horns and leather under the relentless blue sky. Sebastian was not just a man, it was an institution, a reliquary of stories and wisdom that time insisted on not erasing. Her eyes, back and marked by countless dawn and benchmarks, kept the memory of a Brazil that transformed, but which in essence remained wild and indomitable, as well as the bulls he had learned to respect and dominate with a mastery that bordered the sacred. A gift that few men had. Sebastian's hands were maps of a lifetime of hard, thick and heated work by the loop and reins, but agile and accurate when necessary. Each callus, every scar, told a story of an angry bull, an unexpected storm, or a challenge overcome in the Cerrado immensity. He knew cattle like no one else, understood his fears, his fury and his silent language, a communication that transcended the words and settled in the field of pure intuition. For the younger ones, he was a mystery, an anachronistic figure in a rapidly modernized world, but for those who understood the soul of the backlands, he was her own personification. A guardian of traditions that was lost with the surroundings and new technologies. His house, a simple ranch of stick to pike and clay roof, was a sanctuary of memories. On the walls, they hung old drills, leather hats spent on time, and yellowish photographs that portrayed a younger man with haughty and confident smile, always next to his horses and entourage companions. The smell of strong coffee and roller smoke impregnated the environment, a fragrance that was the signature of its presence. There, in that refuge of peace, Sebastião spent his hours recalling the days of glory, the long trips, the nights in a cloak under a cloak of stars, and the unmistakable sound of the cattle marching. A symphony that echoed in his mind as the most beautiful of songs. Many came from afar to hear their stories, to drink from their wisdom. Sitting around a crackling bonfire under the starry sky of the backlands, they listened, fascinated, the reports of their adventures. Sebastião spoke with a paused and serious voice, every word loaded with emotion and truth. He told about the Baron, a Marua bull who led a cattle for over 1,000 kilometers, about the São Francisco River crossing at a time of flood, a feat that many thought impossible. Their stories were not just entertainment, they were life lessons, courage, perseverance, and, above all, a deep respect for nature and their creatures. He taught that being a drover was not just a craft, it was a state of mind. It was necessary to have the patience of the river that surrounds the stone, the strength of the sun that cracks the earth, and the humility of who knows that, before the immensity of the world, we are just a grain of sand. He said that each ox had his personality, his temperament, and that the key to leading them was not in brute force but in the ability to understand and make himself understood. The bond, for him, was not an instrument of mastery but of communication and link that united man with the animal in a dance of respect and mutual trust, an art that was learned with the heart. Over the years, the figure of Sebastião has become even more emblematic. He saw the progress arrive, the railways cut the old entourage routes, and the cattle trucks replaced the long marches. Many of his companions abandoned the life of a drover, seeking new opportunities in cities that grew downsly. But Sebastian remained faithful to his roots, like a solitary Jequitiba in the vastness of the plain. He refused to abandon the lifestyle that defined him, the essence of who he was. For him, modernity was a mirage, an empty promise that pushed man away from his true nature. The few who still ventured into the dusty trails sought him like an oracle. They wanted to know the secrets of the paths, the secure passages through the rivers, the plants that cured the wounds of cattle and men. And Sebastião, with the generosity of the wise, shared his knowledge without asking for anything in return. He knew that his mission was to keep the flame of tradition alive, to pass on the legacy he received from his ancestors. In every advice, in every story told, he planted a seed of hope, the certainty that as long as there was a man willing to hear the call of the backlands, the soul of the drover would never die. He became the guardian of the memory of a time that fades. A time when the word was worth more than any document, when honor was the most precious good of a man and the connection with the earth was the basis of everything. Sebastian was not just a storyteller, he was the incarnate story itself, a living link between the past and the present. His life was a testimony that, even in a constantly changing world, certain values are eternal, certain wisdoms are timeless, and true wealth is not in material goods, but in the simplicity of a life connected to its essence. And so, the old drover followed his journey no longer for the long dirt roads, but by the paths of memory, leading no longer cattle, but the new generations, showing them the way home, to simplicity, the truth, and the pulsating heart of the backlands. His ranch had become a meeting point of souls, a place where the past and the future embraced, and where the legend of Sebastian, the last of the great drovers, perpetuated, more alive and strong than ever, echoing by the vastness as the immortal sound of a beer at dawn. On a neighboring farm, famous for his elite cattle, a bull that challenged all conventions emerged. His name was a spark, a mountain of black muscles and contained fury, with eyes that looked like incandescent embers. No pawn could approach, no bond could stop him. Fate was more than an animal, it was a symbol of rebellion, a force of nature that refused to be subdued. The stories about its ferocity ran the region, rumors that mingled with reality, creating the image of an almost mythological creature, a demon of horns that reigned absolute in their pastures and did not accept the rule of man. The owner of the farm, a rich, proud man named Colonel Amancio, saw an affront to his authority. He offered generous rewards, brought horny pedestrians from other regions, but all failed. The bull seemed to have evil intelligence, anticipating each movement, each trap. He destroyed fences, attacked horses, and kept all at a respectful distance with his intimidating presence. The fame of Spark was growing with each failed attempt to capture, becoming a local legend, a challenge that seemed insurmountable to the vanity of men who judged themselves masters of the earth and everything that inhabited it. The news of the indomitable bull arrived in Sebastião's ears, taken by a young pawn who, with hat in his hand and look of admiration, sought the old drover in his ranch. The boy told, in a voice embargoed by emotion and fear, about the huge force of Spark, about the injured men and the frustration of the Amancio colonel. Sebastião heard in silence, the pipe between the lips, the smoke rising into slow spirals, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if he could see the bull at a distance. There was something in the description of the animal that aroused his curiosity, a spark of recognition in his tropero heart. He did not see in the report only a dangerous animal but a free spirit, a born leader who defended his territory and his freedom with admirable courage. While the young pawn spoke of dominating and breaking the spirit of the bull, Sebastião thought to understand, to establish communication. He knew that violence would only generate more violence, that brute force would be useless against a creature that embodied the very fury of nature. There was a secret there, a language that needed to be deciphered, and the old drover felt the call, the old instinct of his ancestors pulsating into his veins, a challenge at his height. The next day, to everyone's surprise, Sebastião sealed his most faithful horse, the old wind, picked up his braided leather bond and left toward Colonel Amancio's farm. He did not carry spur, no whip, only his presence, his wisdom, and his unwavering calm. His arrival caused a stir. Younger pedestrians looked at him with a mixture of skepticism and hope. Like that old-looking old man, and slow movements could succeed where the strongest and most agile had failed so resoundingly? The colonel received him with disdain, but Sebastião's reputation was so great that he could not refuse help. Sebastião did not go straight to the grazing where he was. First, he walked the farm, watching, feeling the atmosphere. He talked to the pedestrians, not about the force of the bull, but about his habits, about the places where he liked to drink water, over the trees under which he sought shadow. He was drawing a map, not from the ground, but from the soul of the animal. He spent hours just watching a distant Spark, studying his movements, the way he shook his head, the sound of his snort. He was not preparing for a fight, but for a date, a silent dialogue between two beings from different worlds. He saw in a Spark not an enemy, but a reflection of the wild Sebastião he loved so much. A spirit that, like him, refused to bow to the new world of fences and orders. There was a nobility in the bull's rebellion, a purity in his fury. Sebastião realized that Spark was not bad, it was just free. And freedom, when threatened, defends itself with all its strength. The problem was not in the bull, but in the men's attempt to impose their will upon him, to break something that was born to be indomitable. The old drover knew that the way was not strength, but respect. When he finally felt it was the moment, Sebastião rode in wind and slowly rode toward the Spark. He did not make sudden movements, did not shout it, did not stare him directly in the eyes, which would be a sign of challenge. He approached zigzag, singing an old tropero melody, a soft, melancholy song that his mother sang to him. The melody seemed to calm the air, break the tension. The bull, which would usually invest against any intruder, stopped, raised his head, and seemed to hear, intrigued by that unusual and peaceful approach. The old drover and the indomitable bull were face to face, separated by a distance that was both safe and intimate. The silence fell on the farm, all holding their breath, witnessing that unbelievable scene. Sebastião continued to hum, dismantled his horse and, with slow movements, reached out, not to the bull, but to the ground, in a gesture of humility and peace. He didn't want to tie a Spark, he wanted to introduce himself, to show that he was not a threat. At that moment, they were not a man and an animal but two old spirits of the backlands recognizing each other in a silent pact of mutual respect. The news that Sebastião intended to bring Spark with him spread as fire in dry straw. The ranch, the small community of pedestrians, aggregates, and their families living around the old drover went into a poverty. They loved him and respected him like a patriarch, but the idea of bringing that bull whose reputation for aggression was notorious throughout the region to their midst sounded like crazy, an invitation to tragedy. Fear settled in the hearts, a palpable fear that manifested itself in worried whispers and anxious looks. How could they live with such a beast? An entourage of ranch elders, men who grew up listening to the stories of Sebastião and who had the deepest respect for him, went to his home to beg. They sat with him, shared their coffee, and with carefully chosen words tried to deter to him. "Sebastião, for the love we have to the Lord and this land, do not do that," said their eldest, John Carpenter, a man whose hands also told stories of a working life. "This bull is the animal-shaped devil. It will bring the misfortune to our home, to our children, to our animals." They argued with the logic of common sense, with the prudence of those who have seen a lot in this life. They spoke of the risks, the fences that would not be enough to contain it, the constant danger they would represent to all. They described in detail the attacks that I had already perpetrated, the stories of injured pawns, the aura of terror around him. Each word was an appeal, a supplication for the old tropero to reconsider, for his wisdom to prevail over what they saw as a dangerous whim, a stubbornness that could be expensive to all he loved and protected. But Sebastião was made of the same matter as the most resistant trees of the Cerrado. His stubbornness was legendary, a feature that on many occasions had saved him from difficult situations but now seemed to blind him to imminent danger. He listened to everyone patiently, his serene gaze walking the face of each of his friends, but his decision was already made. He saw something no one else could see. It was not just an aggressive animal, it was a challenge, a spirit that needed to be understood, not feared. He believed that the true bravery was not in force, but in the ability to see beyond appearances. "I understand your fear," he said in his calm and firm voice. "But blind fear. You see a beast, I see a king who has been dethroned and does not understand why. His violence is the language of despair, misunderstanding. He does not need a stronger bond, needs someone who speaks his tongue." His words, though poetic, failed to calm the afflicted hearts of their companions, who saw in their speech a dangerous ingenuity. Sebastian's stubbornness was not the result of pride, but of deep conviction and unshakable faith in its own instincts and its connection with the natural world. He spent his entire life deciphering the secrets of animals, learning to read their signs, to anticipate their reactions. For him, to retreat from the Spark challenge would be to betray himself, it would be to admit that his wisdom had a limit, that there was a spirit he could not reach. It was a matter of honor, not with other men, but with oneself and the philosophy of life that has always guided him. Despite the appeals, supplications, and warnings, it remained irreducible. The decision was sealed in his tropero heart. He saw in that mission a kind of coronation of his journey, the final test of everything he had learned in decades of the road. Bringing a Spark to the ranch was not an act of recklessness, but an act of faith. Faith in your ability, faith in your intuition, and, above all, faith in the possibility that even the wilder heart can be touched by patience, respect, and understanding. He was willing to risk everything for this belief. The ranch community was desolate. They were powerless in the face of the determination of the old man. They loved him so much to abandon him, but they feared what was coming. The atmosphere was heavy, a mixture of loyalty and apprehension. They decided that if they could not convince him, they would prepare for the worst. They reinforced the fences, instructed the children not to approach the location for the bull, and organized a surveillance system. They were preparing for a war, while Sebastian prepared for a dialogue. And so the ranch was divided between love for its leader and terror for the creature he insisted on bringing to his environment. The stubbornness of a single man put the peace and safety of an entire community in check. No one knew what the future reserved, but a certainty hovered in the air: the arrival of Spark would change their lives forever. The hope of all was that the wisdom of the old drover, who had so often guided them on the right way, was not terribly mistaken this time, leading them to an announced tragedy. The day came when Sebastião went to fetch a Spark. Against all the counsels and expectations, he did not take a bread of ties and stingers. It was alone, mounted in a wind, taking only his bell and a bag with a little coarse salt. On Colonel Amancio's farm, the mood was funeral. The pedestrians looked at him as if he was walking to his own death. The colonel, with a smile of derision, authorized the endeavor, certain that he witnesses the end of the legend of the old tropero. He wanted to see the old man humiliated by the brute force he so despised. Sebastião did not shake himself with the hostile atmosphere. He rode serenely to the isolated pasture where he spark, lonely and imposing. The bull, realizing the approach, immediately assumed an attack posture, snorting and digging the floor with the front paws. Any other man would have retreated, but Sebastião did the unthinkable. It dismounted from his horse, left the reins loose, and slowly walked toward the beast. He did not face him, kept his eyes low in a sign of submission, speaking to the animal in a low and calm tone as if he talked to an old friend. The scene left all spectators gaping. Its Sparks, the bull that attacked everything that moved, seemed confusing. He growled, shaking his head, but did not invest. There was something in the calm and lack of fear of that man who intrigued him, who broke the pattern of aggression to which he was used to. Sebastião stopped a few meters away and, with a slow movement, took a handful of salt and reached out in his palm, continuing to speak with his meek voice, telling old stories as if the bull could understand him. It was an act of pure confidence, a bet of life or death. Tom seemed to stop. The silence was so deep that one could hear the buzz of insects. Fate took one step ahead, then another. He smelled the air, suspicious. Sebastião remained motionless, his heart beating hard on his chest, but his face serene like a lake. Then, to everyone's absolute astonishment, the bull stretched his neck and began to lick the salt in the old drover's hand. It was a moment of communion, an unlikely truce between fury and peace. At that moment, Sebastian had not tamed the beast, he had conquered it through respect and courage. After the bull finished licking the salt, Sebastião stroked his thick and muscular neck. Fate did not go back, on the contrary, it seemed to enjoy the touch. The old man then turned, whistled to a wind and began to walk slowly without looking back. He did not use rope, did not use a loop, gave no order. Just walked. And then the miracle happened. Spiegel, the indomitable bull, the terror of the region, began to follow it. Like a faithful dog, he accompanied the footsteps of the man who offered him salt and respect instead of pain and fear. The journey back to the ranch was a show that entered the region's folklore. An old drover and his horse, closely followed by a gigantic bull, walking quietly on the dirt roads. People left their homes to see the unbelievable scene, not understanding how it was possible. Sebastião didn't look around, he didn't care about the audience. He just followed his way in silence, knowing that he was being followed not by a prisoner, but by a mate. Driving was not made by force, but by an invisible link of trust. With each kilometer traveled, the bond between man and the bull seemed to be strengthened. Sebastião stopped to say water, shared with him the shadow of the trees, talked to him like a human being. He was not just transporting an animal, was building a relationship. He was proving his thesis that understanding is more powerful than domination. The bull, in turn, seemed to have found something he had never had, peace. Beside that man, he didn't need to be aggressive, he didn't have to fight. He was just a spark, and that was enough. The arrival at the ranch was a moment of tension and amazement. The residents, who prepared for the worst, saw Sebastião arrive walking, with the bull following him docilely. There were no chains, there was no violence, just a disconcerting calm. The old man took a spark to a spacious surrounding he had prepared, opened the gate, and the bull entered without any resistance. He looked at Sebastião, let out a long breath as if finally he was at home, and started grazing quietly. The whole ranch was silent, witnessing the impossible. That day Sebastião not only took a bull to the ranch. He took a lesson. A lesson on courage, empathy, and different forms of power. He proved that true strength does not reside in muscles or weapons, but the ability to connect with each other, to see beyond the surface, to offer respect, to receive respect in return. Sebastião's unexpected journey and spark was not only the conduct of an animal, it was the living demonstration that even the wildest heart can find peace when he finds a spirit that understands him. The spark arrival at the ranch was followed by days of intense expectation. Residents watched from afar, with their hearts in hand, waiting at any moment an explosion of fury, a sign of the aggressiveness that had made him famous. The children were prohibited from approaching the surrounding, and the adults walked with extra care. However, the days turned into weeks, and the bull behavior continued to challenge all dark predictions. Spiegel was a completely different animal from that described in terrifying stories. It was a kind giant. He spent most of his time grazing calmly or lying in the shadow of a large tree, ruminating in peace. His ferocity seemed to have dissipated in the air, replaced by an almost noble serenity. He did not invest against the fence when people passed, did not snort, showed no sign of aggression. On the contrary, it seemed curious, observing the movement of the ranch with its big, intelligent eyes. The only person he approached was Sebastião. When the old drover entered his surroundings, Vigilha came to meet him. He brushed his head on his legs and accepted his stroke with moving docility. The transformation was so radical that people began to doubt if that was really the same bull. Some even speculated that Sebastião with some old witchcraft had exchanged the animals on the way. But no, it was a spark with its bright black coat, its past battle scars, and its imposing horns. The only thing he had changed was his spirit. In the environment of peace and respect created by Sebastião, the bull had no more reason to fight. His aggressiveness was armor, and there he felt safe to undress it. The most unbelievable moment, the scene that sealed the new Spark legend, happened on a hot afternoon. One of the ranch children, a boy named Pedrinho, grandson of João Carpeiro, disobeying his parents' orders, ran after a ball that rolled into the shuttle. A cry of collective dread echoed through the ranch as they saw the small standing figure a few meters from that colossal animal. The boy's mother passed out. The men ran for weapons, but they knew it would be too late. The end seemed inevitable and tragic. Spiegel, which was lying down, rose slowly. Everyone arrested their breath, waiting for the fatal onslaught. The bull walked toward the boy, who, paralyzed with fear, began to cry. But Spark did not attack. He stopped in front of Pedrinho, lowered his huge head and, with his muzzle, gently pushed the ball back to the child's feet. Then he let out a low buffet, as if he was told for him to leave, and turned, walking quietly again to his shadow as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The community was in shock, followed by a wave of relief and admiration that washed the soul of all. Fear gave way to deep respect. In that gesture, he said not only saved a child's life, but he had also proved once and for all that Sebastião was right. The heart of the bull was not bad, it was just misunderstood. He was not a monster, he was a guardian. From that day, the Spark surrounded was no longer seen as a cage, but as a sanctuary. The children, now with their parents' permission, came to approach the fence to observe the kind giant. They talked to him, gave him loving names, and offered him fruits, which he accepted gently. Fagilha became the unofficial protector of the ranch. His simple presence seemed to impose a quiet and peaceful order. He became an attraction, a living legend that attracted curiously from the entire region, no longer to see a beast, but to witness a miracle of unlikely transformation and friendship. Sebastião watched everything with a discreet smile. He never said, "I warned." His satisfaction did not come from the vanity of being right, but of the joy of seeing harmony. He knew that a Spiegel had found his place, his family. The bull was no longer an outcast, an exile. He was part of the community, loved and respected by whom he was. The old drover had looked into the soul of the beast and found a friend, and in doing so, he taught everyone an unforgettable lesson about the nature of bravery and compassion. Thus, he says, the bull that had once been the terror of the backlands became the symbol of peace in the ranch of Sebastião. Its story was told and retorted around the bonfires, a parable about how respect can tame the fury and how a man's courage to see beyond appearances can transform fear into love. The unbelievable behavior of the bull was not a miracle, it was the natural consequence of an act of deep empathy, a witness to the power that resides in kindness, a power capable of calming the wildest storms, both in the animal world and in the hearts of men. The real miracle was not the docility of a Spark, nor the courage of Sebastião as he walked toward him. The real miracle was the change that occurred in the hearts of the Rancho people and the entire region. The history of the Tropeiro and the bull has become a catalyst for a collective transformation, a living lesson that echoed far beyond the fences of that small community. People began to question their own beliefs, their prejudices, and the way they dealt with what they didn't understand, with what they feared. The story forced them to look inside themselves. Sebastião's attitude, based on patience, observation, and respect, has become a new paradigm. The pedestrians, which previously trusted only in brute strength and intimidation to deal with cattle, began to experience the old Tropter's methods. They found that calm and understanding were much more effective tools than the loop and sting. The field in the field has become less violent, more harmonious. They learned that true mastery was not in mastering the animal, but in establishing a partnership with it based on mutual trust. This new philosophy extended beyond dealing with animals. Relationships between the people themselves and the ranch became more kind. Heated discussions gave way to more thoughtful conversations. People started listening to each other, trying to understand the other's point of view before judging. The Spark lesson was clear: aggressiveness is often just a manifestation of fear or pain. By offering empathy instead of confrontation, they found that they could resolve their conflicts much more constructively and peacefully. The story spread, and Sebastião Ranch became a pilgrimage place. People came from afar, not just to see the famous meek bull, but to talk to the old Tropeiro, to learn from him. Colonels and farmers, previously proud and authoritarian, arrived by hat in hand, seeking advice on how to improve their farms and lives. Sebastião, with his usual humility, shared his wisdom, teaching that respect is the seed of all prosperity, whether in crop, creation, or in community life. He taught that every being, whether man or animal, has his own inner spark, a force that can manifest himself as fury when cornered, but reveals himself as a nobility when treated with dignity. The key, he said, was not fearing that strength, but learning to dialogue with her. The miracle was not in changing the bull, but in creating the conditions so that he could show his true nature. The spark transformation was a mirror that reflected the transformation potential that exists in each. The children of the ranch were the ones that absorbed the lesson the most. They grew up with a different understanding of the world, a view in which strength was not synonymous with violence but of integrity and compassion. They have learned from the living example of Spark and Sebastião that true courage is not in facing danger with aggressiveness but having the boldness to offer friendship where everyone expects enmity. These children would become wiser, more empathic adults, carrying the seed of that lesson to future generations. The story even changed Colonel Amancio. After witnessing the impossible, he was taken by a feeling of humility he had never experienced. He visited Sebastian, not to mock, but to ask for forgiveness. He admitted that his pride had blinded him and that the strength he valued so much was a weakness. He became one of the greatest promoters of Sebastião's philosophy, implementing respectful management practices in all its properties and becoming a fairer man with his employees. The ranch flourished. The peace and harmony that reigned there seemed to bless the earth. The harvests were more full, the healthier cattle, and the happiest people. The community has become an example of how coexistence based on mutual respect can generate prosperity in every way. Sebastian's legacy was no longer only in his past stories, but in the living and pulsating reality he helped build, a reality where the strongest was not what his will imposed, but what had the greatest heart. Thus, the true miracle proved not to be an isolated and supernatural event, but a continuous process of learning and human evolution. It was the discovery that the greatest strength we have is the ability to love, to understand, and to respect life in all its forms. The story of an old tropero and an indomitable bull has taught everyone that true magic is not changing the world, but in having the courage to change himself and, through this, inspire the world to change as well. Have you heard of a friendship that can silence fury and turn fear into admiration? In the heart of the backlands, an old tropero, whose wisdom was as vast as the land itself, made a decision that everyone thought was his sentence. He decided to take home the most aggressive and dreaded bull in the region, an animal that collected stories of violence and destruction. The rancho begged, his friends pleaded, but his stubbornness was unshakable. What happened below challenges logic and redefines everything we know about courage and communication. Get ready for a story that proves that the greatest power is not in strength but in understanding.